The first time Raymond Garrison saw her, she was standing in the blue-black dark before dawn with a whetstone in one hand and a wood-handled hatchet in the other, dragging the blade across the stone in long, practiced strokes that rang out across the quiet valley like a church bell no one had thought to ring. He had been riding the old Cimarron Trail since before sunup, heading nowhere particular, the kind of man who had learned to be comfortable with the idea that nowhere particular was exactly where a man like him belonged. His horse, a thick-chested roan named Anchor, had slowed on the rise above the valley without being asked, and Raymond had let him stand there a moment, watching the distant figure below with nothing more than idle curiosity at first. Just a person, just a light, just a sound that carried farther than it ought to in that cold October stillness of 1879. Then he noticed it was a woman, not just a woman standing idle at a porch, but a woman working. Working with deliberate, unhurried purpose, while the rest of the world remained asleep. There was a small oil lantern set on the top step of the farmhouse porch, throwing a warm amber circle around her feet, and she crouched just inside that circle, running the blade of a bucksaw along a flat whetstone propped against the lower step. She set the hatchet down on the porch boards with a clean, decisive sound, picked up the bucksaw, tested the first tooth with her thumb, and went back to work. Raymond sat on Anchor for a long time that morning. Long enough for the eastern sky to shift from black to deep blue, then to the pale gray that comes just before color returns to the world. By the time he finally pressed his heels gently into Anchor's sides and rode on, the woman had gone inside, and the lantern had been taken with her, and the farm below the road looked like every other quiet farm in the New Mexico territory. Weathered, silent, holding its breath, but he thought about her the whole rest of that day. He was camped about 2 miles east along the creek bed, having no pressing reason to push farther towards Cimarron town, and he sat by his small fire that evening eating beans from a tin and trying to put together the pieces of what he had seen. A farm that size 100 and some acres by his rough estimation, with a barn that needed paint and fencing that sagged in places but held, was not a one-person operation by any ordinary measure. A farm like that needed at least a hired hand, preferably 2, but he had seen no one else moving in the early light, just her. Just that lantern, just those long, careful strokes on the whetstone. He rode past the rise again the following morning. She was there before he arrived. He could hear the sound of sharpening from the road before he even crested the hill. This time he pulled Anchor to a stop at the crest and sat longer, maybe 20 minutes, watching in the growing light. She was working through a full set of tools, he realized. Not just the hatchet and the bucksaw from the day before. She had laid them out along the porch railing in a row, a short-handled spade, a mattock, a pair of pruning shears, the hatchet, the bucksaw, and what looked from his distance like a drawknife. She moved through them systematically, left to right, finishing one before moving to the next, and there was something almost ceremonial in the way she did it. Not rushed, not bored. Focused in the way a person is focused when they know exactly why the thing they are doing matters. He came back the 3rd morning and the 4th, and by the 5th morning he had admitted to himself that he was not stopping because of the sound or the sight of the tools being sharpened, though both of those things were oddly compelling. He was stopping because something about the whole picture of her alone in that lantern light, doing the hard, quiet work of keeping a farm running, caught in his chest like a burr, and he could not ride past it without pausing. On the 6th morning he learned her name, though not from her. He had ridden into Cimarron the evening before to buy grain for Anchor and coffee for himself, and he had stopped at the general store run by a wide-set man named Dearborn who seemed to know everything about everyone within 40 miles. Raymond had asked, in what he hoped was a casual way, about the farm in the low valley just west of the Cimarron Road, the one with the red barn. Dearborn had given him a look that said he was not fooled by casual. "That's the Winslow place," the man said. "Belle Winslow runs it now, has done since her husband passed, about 2 years back." 2 years, Raymond said. Chester Winslow took sick in the spring of '77, was gone by summer. Dearborn set Raymond's coffee tin on the counter with a small thud. Shame of it. Good man, Chester. Left her the land and the debt both, which is the way of things more often than not. She's kept it running, though, I'll say that for her. Most folks expected her to sell out and move on. She didn't. She have family nearby. Not close. She's got a boy, Eli, 8 years old. Does most of the inside work since she does most of the outside work. They manage. Dearborn studied Raymond with open curiosity. You thinking of buying land out that way? Just passing through, Raymond said, and put his coins on the counter. He rode back toward the creek that night with her name sitting in his mind like something he had always known and only just been reminded of. Belle Winslow. It was the right kind of name for a woman like that, solid and musical at the same time, a name that had weight and grace in equal parts. On the 7th morning, he did not stop at the crest of the hill. He rode down. He did not plan exactly what he would say. He was not by nature a man who planned conversations in advance. Having found that plans of that kind tended to fall apart the moment the actual person in question opened their mouth, and became real in a way that the planned version of them never was. He rode Anchor down the long slope at a slow walk, giving her time to hear him coming, giving himself time to feel less like a man who had been watching from a ridge for a week and more like a man who was simply passing on the road and decided to stop. She heard him before he was halfway down. He saw her head come up, saw her hand go briefly toward the hatchet lying on the porch boards beside her, and then she straightened and stood still, watching him come. The lantern was burning behind her on the step. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, pale silver at the horizon. He stopped Anchor at the fence gate and did not come through it. That felt important. He took off his hat. "Morning," he said. She looked at him with steady gray eyes that were neither warm nor cold, just careful. She was maybe 30, perhaps a touch less, with dark hair pulled back from her face and a jaw that suggested she was not someone who entertained nonsense. She was wearing a heavy canvas work apron over a blue wool dress, and she had the whetstone still in her left hand, though she was not currently using it. "Morning," she said, and waited. "I've been riding past on the road the last several days," Raymond said, because there was no point in pretending he hadn't. A woman alone on a farm noticed things. She already knew. "I couldn't help but see you working out here before sunup each time. I thought I'd come down and ask if there was anything that needed a hand." A pause. Not an uncomfortable one exactly, but a measuring one. She was measuring him the same way she would measure a tool, looking for the balance point, looking for where the metal would hold and where it might break. "What kind of hand?" she said. "The useful kind, if you'll have it. I'm passing through, but I'm in no hurry. I can work." "What kind of work do you do?" "Whatever needs doing. I've worked cattle, built fence, dug wells, done carpentry. I was a farrier before I started drifting." He looked at Anchor. "Still am when someone needs it." She looked at his horse the same way she'd looked at him. Then she looked back at Raymond. "You got a name?" "Raymond Garrison. Out of Taos originally, more recently just out of wherever I was last." Something small shifted in her expression. Not a smile, not yet, but a kind of loosening at the corners of her eyes. "Belle Winslow," she said. "The fence on the east side has been down since September. If you want useful work, that would be useful." "I'll start on it today if you show me where," he said. "After breakfast," she said, and turned back toward the door. Then she paused with one hand on the frame and looked back at him over her shoulder. "Can you sharpen a drawknife?" "I can." "Then sit down on the steps and show me how you hold the stone," she said. "Because you'll be sharpening your own tools on this farm if you're going to be using them, and I've found most men hold the stone wrong." He tied Anchor at the fence post and came through the gate. He sat on the second porch step and she stood beside him and watched him pick up the drawknife, and he showed her how he held the stone at a lower angle than most men used, which kept a finer edge. She watched without saying anything, and when he finished the first pass she took the drawknife from him and tested the edge with her thumb the same way he'd seen her do it from the road, with that practiced, authoritative gesture, and she gave a small nod that he suspected was not something she gave easily. "That's better than most," she said. You had it at a steeper angle, he said, nodding at the stone. I know. Chester always held it steeper. It was the way his father taught him. She picked up the whetstone. I taught myself, so I learned it wrong and then had to unlearn it. But I didn't know I had it wrong until I tried cutting with a drawknife that had been properly sharpened and felt the difference. How'd you find out? Neighbor came by about 6 months after Chester passed. Man named Aldrich. He sharpened a few things for me as a kindness, and I watched and took note. She looked at him steadily. I don't ask for help easily, Mr. Garrison, and I don't like not knowing how to do a thing. So I watched and I learned, and now I do it myself. I can see that, Raymond said. There was a sound from inside the house, small boots on wooden floors, and then the door opened and a boy appeared. He was slight for 8, with his mother's gray eyes and a serious expression that sat a little old on his young face. He looked at Raymond with the kind of frank assessment that children haven't yet learned to disguise. "Mama," he said, "this is Mr. Garrison, Eli. He's going to fix the east fence today." Eli considered this. "The whole east fence? That's the goal," Raymond said. Eli looked at his mother. "Does he know how bad it is?" Belle made a small sound that might, in another context, have been a laugh. "Go set the table," she said. "Mr. Garrison will eat with us." Eli went back inside, still studying Raymond as he went, and Raymond looked at Belle and found that she was watching him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. There was something in it beyond the careful measuring he'd seen before, something that looked almost like recognition, though they had only just properly met. "He worries about things," she said. "He's had reason to." "A boy who worries about the fence isn't a bad thing," Raymond said. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She picked up the hatchet she'd been working on, tested it once more, and set it back in its place in the row. "Come inside then, Mr. Garrison. I'll make eggs." The kitchen was small and orderly and smelled of wood smoke, and the pine soap she used to clean the floors. There was a cast-iron stove that had been well maintained, a table with 3 chairs, and a row of pegs near the door where coats and a boy's cap hung in a neat line. On the windowsill above the dry sink there was a small clay pot with a dried wildflower in it, one small, surprising splash of color in an otherwise thoroughly practical room. Raymond took the chair closest to the door, which he always did from old habit, and watched Belle move through the kitchen with the same efficient economy she'd shown with the tools. She did not rush, and she did not dither. She knew where everything was, and she went directly to it, and the result was that eggs appeared on the table in less time than he would have thought possible. Eli sat across from him and ate with one eye still on the stranger at their table. "Are you a cowboy?" Eli asked. "I've done cowboy work," Raymond said, "but I've done a lot of other kinds too." "What kind of work do you like best?" Raymond thought about it honestly. "Farrier work," he said. "Working with horses. There's something satisfying about it. A horse can't tell you what's wrong, so you have to pay attention and figure it out yourself." Eli processed this with the gravity of a small judge. "Mama says paying attention is the most important thing." "Your mama is right." Belle sat down with her own plate and her coffee, and Raymond noticed she drank it black, and he drank his the same way when she poured it, and neither of them made anything of that small coincidence. They ate mostly in comfortable quiet, with Eli doing most of the talking, which mostly concerned the east fence and a red heifer who had gotten through it twice already, and what Raymond's plan was for the specific post near the creek crossing that had been rotting since last spring. Raymond's plan turned out to be sound, as he discovered when he walked the east fence line after breakfast with Eli trotting alongside him, giving a detailed accounting of every weak point. The fence was about 300 yards of it that needed serious attention, the worst section being near the creek where the soil stayed wet, and the posts had begun to rot at the base. He'd need to set new posts in 3 places, restring wire in 2, and reinforce the gate in the northeast corner that someone had rigged with baling wire in lieu of proper hardware. He worked steadily through the morning and into the afternoon. Belle appeared at midday with a canteen of water and a wedge of cornbread wrapped in cloth, set them on the fence post without ceremony, said gate hinges are in the barn on the middle shelf left side, and walked back toward the house. He worked until the light began to fail. By then the fence was solid, the gate swung clean on new hinges, and the 3 replacement posts were set in tamped earth that would hold through a hard winter. He found Belle in the barn finishing the evening feeding. She looked at the fence from the barn door, walked its length with a practiced eye, tested the new posts with both hands. "That's solid work," she said. "It'll hold," he agreed. She looked at him with that measuring gaze again. "There's more work if you want it. The barn roof needs attention before the snow comes. There's a section on the north side where the shingles have lifted." "I can do that," he said. "I pay a fair wage. I'm not asking for charity." "I didn't take it that way," he said. A long moment passed between them in the quiet barn, with the horses moving softly in their stalls and the smell of hay and oats around them, and the last of the day's light falling through the open doors in long gold slants. "You can sleep in the barn loft," she said at last. "It's clean and dry. I won't have a man I don't know sleeping in the house, but the barn will do until I know you better." "That's more than fair," he said. "Don't make me regret it, Mr. Garrison." "I'll try not to, Mrs. Winslow." She gave him a single direct nod, the kind that served as both acknowledgement and small challenge, and went back into the house, and Raymond stood in the quiet barn for a moment feeling something he had not felt in a long time. He was not sure what to call it exactly. Something like the opposite of drifting, something like the sense that a place might be worth stopping in. He spread his bedroll in the clean hay of the loft and lay on his back looking up at the dark rafters and listened to the horses breathe below him. And he thought about the way she held a whetstone, and the way she had poured his coffee without asking how he took it, and the small dried flour on the kitchen windowsill. And he slept better than he had in months. The days that followed built themselves naturally into a pattern, the way work will do when the people doing it are well matched in their pace and their seriousness. Raymond rose before dawn and found Belle already on the porch with her tools, and he sat with her sometimes and worked on whatever needed his attention from the tool row, and they talked sometimes and were quiet sometimes, and both were equally comfortable. He had not expected the quiet comfort. He had expected to feel like a hired hand, which was what he was, more or less. Instead, he felt like something harder to name, like someone who had been expected. The barn roof took 3 days, working from sunup to the middle of the afternoon each day. It was meticulous work, pulling the lifted shingles, checking the boards beneath for rot, replacing where needed, laying new shingles in overlapping rows that would shed water cleanly. Belle brought him lunch on the roof on the 2nd day, climbing the ladder herself with a plate in one hand, and a steadiness that made it clear she was not a woman for whom heights were an issue. And they sat on the slope of the barn roof eating salt pork and biscuits, while a hawk circled in the blue sky above them, and Eli ran in the yard below with a stick, pretending to be something fearless. "How long had Chester been gone before you started doing the tools in the mornings?" Raymond asked. She considered the question as if deciding whether it was the kind she wanted to answer. "A month, maybe 6 weeks," she said. "The farm kept needing things and I couldn't keep waiting for someone to come and help who might not come, so I started doing it myself, started with the things I already knew a little and learned the rest." "What did you know when he passed?" "Cooking, sewing, the kitchen garden, tending sick animals some." She looked out over the valley which spread below them wide and golden in the October light. "Chester did the heavy work. The fencing, the tilling, the carpentry. I watched, but watching isn't the same as doing." "No," Raymond agreed. "It's a start, though." "It is," she said. "I made a lot of mistakes that first year. I set 2 fence posts in the wrong place and had to pull them out again. I re-roofed the chicken coop twice because the first time I laid the shingles backwards. I broke a plow blade trying to work ground that was too hard and too dry." She said these things without embarrassment as simple fact. "But I learned from each of them." "You did better than most would have," Raymond said. She looked at him sideways. "Did I? Or did I just do what I had to because the alternative was giving up the farm and moving to some town to take in laundry?" "Both can be true," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her biscuit and took a bite and looked back out at the valley, and he had the sense that what he'd said had landed somewhere it mattered, though she was not a woman who said so. Eli came and found him one afternoon while Raymond was splitting wood behind the barn, and the boy sat on a stump and watched him work with the same evaluating gaze he'd used on the first morning. "My mama doesn't smile very much," Eli said, after a while. Raymond swung the maul and the log split clean. "She's got a lot on her mind," he said. "She smiled when you fixed the gate," Eli said. "She thought I wasn't looking, but I was." Raymond set another log on the block. "Is that right?" "She used to smile more," Eli said. "Before Papa got sick, she smiled a lot then." He picked up a wood chip and turned it in his fingers. "Do you think she'll smile more again?" Raymond swung the maul and held the question honestly in his mind before he answered it. "I think she will," he said. "I think it takes time is all." Eli nodded seriously. "How much time?" "Different for everyone." Raymond stacked the split halves. "The thing about your mama is she's the kind of woman who does things in her own time and her own way. I don't think you can hurry her." "I know that," Eli said, with the weary wisdom of a child who had long since figured out a fundamental truth about his parent. "I just wondered if you knew it." Raymond looked at the boy. "I'm starting to," he said. Eli nodded, apparently satisfied, and slid off the stump and ran back toward the house. A week turned into 2, and 2 into 3, and October pulled toward its end with the cold coming down from the mountains in the early mornings and the cottonwoods along the creek turning gold, and then releasing their leaves into the water. Raymond repaired the south pasture gate, rechinked the barn wall where the wind came through, built new shelving in the root cellar, and replaced 3 floor planks on the porch that had gone soft with age and moisture. He and Belle fell into the habit of sitting on the repaired porch in the evenings after Eli had gone to bed. Her with a cup of tea she kept doctored with a little dried mint from the kitchen garden, him with coffee, and they talked in the way that people talk when they are learning each other without rushing, which is to say they moved carefully and without pressure, circling the important things gradually rather than going at them straight. He told her about Taos, about his mother who had been a teacher's daughter from Ohio, and his father, who had been a hard-working man of few words who had taught Raymond the farrier trade starting at age 12. He told her about the years after his father died when he had worked cattle drives up through Kansas, 3 of them, before concluding that cattle drives were miserable, and the men who did them were miserable in ways they did not always recognize as misery. He told her about the slow drift that had followed, job to job, place to place, and how it had felt like freedom for a while, and then had started feeling like something else he didn't have an easy name for. She told him about growing up in the eastern part of the territory, near Anton Chico, the daughter of a sheep rancher who had died when she was 15 and left the family to manage as best they could. She had married Chester Winslow at 22, which she said had been a good marriage, and she said it plainly and without performance, in a way that made it clear she was not asking him to compete with a memory. Chester had been a decent, hard-working man who had loved her sincerely and been loved back, and his death had been a grief she had carried honestly and was still carrying in its diminished form, and that was the simple truth of it. "Do you miss him?" Raymond asked one evening and then wondered if that was too direct, but she answered directly, which he was coming to understand was her way. "I miss who we were together," she said, "the rhythm of it. Knowing there was someone who knew all the small things, where I keep things what I like, when to leave me alone and when not to." She was quiet a moment. "I miss being known." The words sat in the quiet between them, small and enormous at the same time. "Yes," Raymond said. "I understand that." She looked at him. "Have you been married?" "No." "Close." He thought of a woman in Santa Fe 3 years back who had been kind and pretty and completely right for a different kind of man than he was at the time. "Once I might have been," he said, "but I wasn't what I needed to be yet. And now," he looked at his coffee cup, "now I think I'm closer to it," he said. A silence settled over the porch that was different from the easy silences they'd shared before, fuller, more charged, like the air before a storm, but not threatening, just significant. Belle looked out at the dark yard where the last of the cottonwood leaves were moving in the night wind. Then she said, with the same directness she brought to everything, "Why did you come down from the road that morning, Mr. Garrison? The honest reason." He thought about it. He could have said he needed work, which was true enough. He could have said he admired the sight of someone working hard, which was also true. But she had asked for the honest reason, and she deserved it. "Because watching you made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time," he said. "Something like wanting to be near a thing instead of just passing it by. And I've passed by a lot of things." He paused. "I'm not sure that makes good sense." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "It makes enough sense." She did not say anything more that evening, but when she stood to go inside, she looked at him for a moment with an expression that was different from the careful measuring she'd started with. Something in it had softened, just at the edges, just enough. November arrived with its cold clarity, mornings sharp as the tools Belle kept in perfect order. The sky, a deep blue that only exists in that high desert country in the weeks before the real cold comes down for the winter. Raymond was by now as much a part of the farm's daily operations as the fence he had mended, and he had stopped thinking of himself as a passing hired hand, though he had not yet said so to anyone except himself. He had settled into the barn loft with a few small improvements that Eli had helped him make: a proper peg for his coat, a plank shelf for his books, a second blanket from his saddlebag that kept the cold from coming up through the hay. He had 3 books, which was 2 more than most men he knew carried while traveling: a worn copy of a surveying manual, a collection of Shakespeare's plays that had belonged to his mother, and a small leather-bound journal in which he wrote sometimes in the evenings. Nothing literary, just the facts of days. Eli had discovered the Shakespeare and had become deeply interested in it, and Raymond found himself reading passages aloud in the evenings when Eli was supposed to be doing his schoolwork, which was taught by Belle from a set of worn McGuffey readers and a mathematics primer. Belle came to the barn door one evening to fetch Eli to bed and found them both sitting in the hay light with the book open between them, Raymond reading Hamlet's speech about the undiscovered country, and she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and an expression on her face that Raymond was starting to recognize as the closest she came to open happiness. "He should be in bed," she said, but she did not sound particularly urgent about it. "5 more minutes," Eli said, with the ancient confidence of a child who knows the battle is already lost. She came and sat in the hay beside them and listened to Raymond read the rest of the speech. And when he closed the book, she took Eli by the hand and walked him to the house, and Raymond stood at the barn door watching the lantern light move across the yard between them, and felt something so clearly and completely that it embarrassed him with its simplicity. He was in love with Belle Winslow. He had probably been in love with her since the first morning on the road, before he had known her name, before he had known anything except the sound of a whetstone in the dark, and the shape of a woman who did not wait for the world to come to her. He did not say so that night, or the next day, or the day after that. He was not afraid exactly, but he was careful. Careful in the way that a man is careful with something he values. He had no right to assume that what he felt was returned or even recognized, and Belle was not a woman who would thank him for moving faster than she was ready to move, and he knew that, and he respected it. But things were shifting between them. He could feel it in the way she stood near him now when they were working together, closer than the distance of pure business. He could feel it in the way their conversations had lost the last of their formality, in the way she laughed sometimes now, a real, unguarded laugh, not frequent but genuine when it came, and it transformed her face in a way that did something painful and wonderful to his chest simultaneously. One afternoon they were working together in the root cellar, organizing the winter store's sacks of dried beans, canned goods she'd put up through the summer, dried corn, flour in sealed barrels. When their hands reached for the same flour sack at the same moment and stopped, 4 inches apart, and neither of them moved for the space of a few seconds that were somehow much longer than that. Then Belle picked up the flour sack and set it on the shelf, and Raymond picked up the beans, and nothing was said, but the air in the root cellar had changed, and they both knew it. That evening on the porch he said, "Belle," and stopped. She looked at him. "I think you know that what I feel about being here is more than the work," he said. "I want to say it plainly because I think you deserve plain." She sat very still. "Say it then," she said. "I care for you," he said, "more than I have any right to yet maybe. But I'm not built for pretending otherwise." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not asking for anything. I just didn't want there to be a pretense between us." Belle looked out at the dark yard for a long time. A coyote called somewhere to the east and then went quiet. The night was very cold and very clear. "I know what you feel," she said at last. "I've known for a while." She paused. "I want to be honest with you too, Raymond. What I feel is more complicated than just fear, but fear is part of it. I was married to a good man for 7 years and I lost him, and losing him nearly broke something in me that I'm not sure I've fully put back together yet." "I know that," he said, "and there's Eli to think about. He's already attached to you. If you decide to drift again, that will cost him something." "I know that too," Raymond said. "I'm not going to drift." He said it simply, without drama, because it was the simplest truth he had. "I haven't wanted to stay anywhere in a long time, Belle. I want to stay here." She looked at him then fully, in the way she rarely did, without the measuring distance, and what was in her face was something raw and careful and real. "Give me some time," she said. "Not because I don't feel what I feel, but because I need to be sure I'm not just reaching for something because it's winter and it's cold and it's been 2 years and I'm tired of doing everything alone." "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll be here." She nodded once. She went inside. He sat on the porch in the cold for a while longer, looking at the stars that were enormous and brilliant over the valley, and he felt quietly certain of things in a way he had not felt quietly certain of anything in a very long time. There were complications, of course. Life on a New Mexico Territory farm in the late fall of 1879 was not short on complications. The first was the matter of a man named Stokes, who had apparently been making offers on the Winslow farm since Chester passed. Belle mentioned him with a careful neutralness of tone that told Raymond the situation was more fraught than she was letting on. "He made another offer last week," she said one morning while they were working on the morning tools, the two of them side by side on the porch steps in the gray pre-dawn the way they always were now. "Came by while you were in town for the grain." "What kind of offer?" Raymond said. "Money. A fair price, actually. More than Chester paid for the land 10 years ago." She was working the drawknife with the correct angle now, Raymond's angle, and doing it smoothly. "He wants to add it to his acreage on the south side of the valley." "What did you tell him?" "What I always tell him, that it's not for sale." She set the drawknife down and picked up the mattock. "He doesn't believe me when I say it. He thinks I'll change my mind eventually, that a woman alone can't sustain a farm this size indefinitely." "Can you?" Raymond asked, not as a challenge but as a real question. Belle looked at him. "With good help, yes. Without good help, maybe. Alone, it would be very hard." She tested the mattock head for tightness in the socket. "But I'm not selling Chester's land to a man like Stokes. This was Chester's dream and it's Eli's inheritance, and I'll work my hands to the bone before I let it go." Raymond understood this completely. "What's Stokes like?" "Particular," Belle said, which in the way she said it meant something that was not a compliment. "He has a lot of land and he wants more. He's been acquiring farms throughout this valley for 3 years. He's not a cruel man, I don't think, but he's the kind of man who believes that having money makes him right." She paused. "He also thinks that because I am a widow I am in some indirect sense available to his suggestions, which I am not." Raymond felt something tighten in his jaw. "Has he been disrespectful?" "No," she said. "Not overtly. He's too clever for that. But there's a way a man can make a suggestion that has more in it than the words, and he's good at that." She met Raymond's eyes. "I handle it, Raymond. I've been handling it." "I know you have," he said. "I just want to know if I should be standing in the yard the next time he rides in." She considered him for a moment with something in her eyes that might have been warmth. "You can be in the yard," she said. Working, that's all. Stokes came by 3 days later, mid-morning, riding a well-appointed sorrel with a silver-mounted bridle that announced his prosperity before he did. He was perhaps 50, thick through the shoulders, with a broad, florid face and the kind of easy confidence that comes from having been told yes a great many times. He pulled up at the fence and looked down at Raymond, who was replacing a section of fence post on the yard side of the house, and his expression ran through surprise and recalibration in the space of 2 seconds. Belle came out of the house at the sound of the horse, and she came to stand at the fence with her arms loose at her sides, not crossed, not defensive, just present. "Mrs. Winslow," Stokes said with a tipped hat, "I see you've taken on some help." "I have," she said. "Mr. Garrison has been working the farm for the past several weeks. He's a skilled hand." Stokes looked at Raymond with the particular kind of assessment that is not really about the person being assessed. "Garrison," he said. Raymond looked back at him steadily. "Mr. Stokes," he said, because Belle had told him the man's name and it did not cost him anything to acknowledge it. Stokes looked back at Belle. "I've come with another consideration of the offer I made last week, Mrs. Winslow. I've increased the figure." "The farm is not for sale," Belle said, and there was nothing hostile in it, nothing uncertain, just the flat, absolute fact of the matter. "At some point you'll want. The farm is not for sale at any point," Belle said. "I appreciate that you've made repeated offers, Mr. Stokes. I understand it's good land and good water access. But I will not sell it, and I think we will both save time if we accept that this is settled." A pause. Stokes looked from her to Raymond and back again, and Raymond could see the man processing the new information of Raymond's presence and fitting it into his understanding of the situation, which clearly shifted some of his calculations. "I see," Stokes said, with a tone that managed to be neutral and insinuating at the same time. "Well, if anything changes, Mrs. Winslow." "It won't," she said pleasantly, and waited while he turned his horse and rode back out through the gate, which she closed behind him with a small, definitive click. She turned to Raymond. "Thank you for being visible," she said. "I was just fixing fence," he said. The corner of her mouth moved. "Yes," she said. "You were." The weather broke in the second week of November with the first real snow, not heavy, just an inch or two overnight, enough to coat everything and make the farm look like a different place in the morning, pale and still and sparkling in the thin early light. Raymond came out of the barn loft at first light and found Belle already on the porch, not sharpening tools. The snow made the steps too cold and wet for that, but standing at the railing with her coffee cup, looking out at the white yard with an expression that was briefly, unguardedly peaceful. She heard him come out of the barn and looked at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, just stood in the cold white quiet of the first snow of winter. And then Eli exploded out of the house door in his coat with his boots half on and his cap pulled crooked, and his face bright with the pure uncomplicated joy of a child seeing snow. And he ran into the yard and threw himself down into it, and made an angel with sweeping arms, and Belle laughed. The real laugh, full and open, the one that did the thing to Raymond's chest. He laughed too, he could not help it. Eli scrambled up and pointed at them both. "You have to make one too, both of you." "I have work," Belle said, still laughing. "The work will wait 5 minutes, Mama." She looked at Raymond with raised eyebrows, a look that was half challenge, half question. And he walked into the yard and threw himself down in the snow beside Eli's angel, and made one of his own with considerably less grace and considerably more enthusiasm than was perhaps dignified. And when he stood up, Belle was watching from the porch rail with her coffee cup and her laughing eyes, and the snow bright around her, and the morning light catching her dark hair. And Raymond thought very clearly and calmly that he would like to stand in a snowy yard, making snow angels with this woman and her son for the rest of his life. He was going to have to say something more than he had said. He said it a week later. They were in the barn together in the evening, doing the last of the feeding, and it was warm in there the way barns are warm in cold weather, filled with the heat of the animals and the smell of hay, and Eli had already gone in for bed. They worked together easily, moving around each other in the small space with the familiarity of people who have shared work for weeks. And when the last horse was fed and the last stall checked, they stood for a moment in the lantern light with the night pressing dark against the barn doors, and Raymond looked at Belle and said, "I'd like to court you properly. If you'll allow it." She looked at him. She set down the feed bucket she was holding. She looked at him for a long time with that gray-eyed steady gaze, and he waited. "You're already here every day," she said. "That's work," he said. "This would be something else, something acknowledged." "You mean you want people to know?" "I mean I want you to know," he said, "that when I sit with you in the evening it's not just because I have nowhere else to be. That when I read to Eli it's not just because I like the boy, though I do. That I'm here because I want to be here specifically, not somewhere else." Belle was quiet for a moment. She turned the feed bucket handle over in her fingers. She said, "I've been thinking about what you said about wanting to stay, and I believe you," she said, and looked up. "I'm not entirely sure I should believe you that easily, but I do." A pause. "I want to believe you." "Then believe me," he said gently. She exhaled slowly. "Court me properly," she said. "Yes, all right." And for the first time since he'd known her, she looked almost shy, just for a moment, just a brief softening that showed him a version of her that had probably not been visible for a long time, and it moved him more than anything had in years. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said, and picked up her lantern and walked out of the barn, and he could see by the set of her shoulders that she was smiling, though she had her back to him. Courting Belle Winslow was, Raymond discovered, exactly as much like everything else about her as he could have predicted. She was not a woman for elaborate gestures or flowery speeches, but she received small, genuine attentions with a quiet pleasure that was its own kind of eloquence. He brought her wildflowers when he found them, even in that late season, dried brown things from along the creek that were admittedly not much to look at, but that she took and set on the kitchen windowsill with the same care she gave to the small clay pot that was already there. He read to her in the evenings the way he read to Eli, sometimes Shakespeare, sometimes the surveying manual when she was interested in the technical aspects of something they'd been working on, sometimes nothing at all, just the companionable silence of two people in the same lamplight. He took her and Eli to Cimarron on the first Saturday of December, all three of them on the wagon with Eli wedged between them on the bench, bundled in coats, the roan and Belle's steady bay mare pulling together in good humor. Cimarron in December was cold and small and thoroughly itself, the kind of town that did not pretend to be more than it was, and it suited Raymond just fine. They bought supplies at Dearborn's store, where Dearborn looked from Raymond to Belle and back with barely concealed satisfaction, and said nothing, but charged them fair prices. And Eli spent a coin he'd saved on a stick of peppermint candy, and was immediately and comprehensively content with the world. They had lunch at the hotel dining room, which was warm and served beef stew and biscuits, and was populated with various citizens of Cimarron who all noticed Belle Winslow eating with a man, and all managed to be very busy looking elsewhere, which was the local etiquette for such things. It was all perfectly proper. Raymond sat across from Belle and across from Eli and ate stew, and listened to Eli describe in detail his plan for a snow fort he intended to build along the north side of the barn. And he watched Belle listen to her son with that expression she saved for him, that private warmth, and he felt so thoroughly content that it was almost alarming. On the way home, the sky went gray and soft and began to snow in earnest, fat, lazy flakes that covered the road ahead of them, and settled on the horses' backs and on Eli's coat and cap until he looked like a small, snow-covered mountain. And Belle laughed at him and pulled his cap down over his eyes, and he laughed too, and the sound of it went out into the white afternoon and disappeared, and Raymond held the reins with both hands and thought. This. He had written to his mother's sister in Taos, the only family he had left, and told her simply that he was in Cimarron and had found work and was doing well. He did not say more than that in the letter because he did not yet know enough to say more, but he knew that he was not going anywhere, and he put something of that certainty into the letter, and he supposed his aunt, who was a perceptive woman, would read between the lines. December deepened, and the farm settled into its winter rhythms. There was less outdoor work in the heavy cold, but there was always something. Repairs, the care of the animals, the cutting and stacking of firewood, the maintenance of equipment for the spring. Raymond and Belle worked side by side through the short winter days, and in the evenings they sat by the kitchen stove with Eli doing his schoolwork between them and the snow pressing against the dark windows. And there was a domesticity to it so complete and so natural that Raymond sometimes had to remind himself it was still new. Belle talked more freely now than she had at the start, letting him into the interior of her life without the careful measurement she'd once applied to every word. She told him about the specific grief of watching Chester decline slowly through that spring and summer of 1877, the way it had been both drawn out and, too, sudden at the end. She told him about the particular loneliness of being a widow in a place where everyone knew her as Chester Winslow's wife and wasn't quite sure what to make of her as just Belle. She told him about the first morning she had sat on the porch before dawn and sharpened the hatchet, how she had cried through most of it but had kept sharpening, and how by the end of it something had shifted in her, some understanding that she could do this, that the capacity was in her, that she was not going to fail. "I was so angry that first year," she said one evening, just the two of them by the stove after Eli had gone to bed. "Not at Chester. He didn't ask to die, just at the situation. At the fact that it had all fallen on me and I hadn't been prepared for it and I was supposed to somehow just manage." "You more than managed," Raymond said. "I'm not looking for praise," she said, but gently. "I just mean that I understand now that I was capable of a great deal more than I had been allowed to discover while Chester was alive, not because he was unkind. He wasn't, but because there are things that only emerge when they have to." Raymond thought about his own wandering years, the way he had understood certain things about himself only by being stripped of the comfort of staying still. "Yes," he said, "I know what you mean." "I think you do," she said. And she reached across the small space between their chairs and put her hand over his briefly, just for a moment, and then took it back. It was the first time she had touched him with intention, and it was so simple and so much that he sat very still and let the moment settle through him like warmth. She looked at him afterward with a slight color in her face, as if she had surprised herself. "I didn't plan to do that," she said. "I'm glad you did," he said. She looked at the stove. "So am I," she said quietly. He kissed her for the first time on a Wednesday in mid-December, though the day of the week is perhaps not the most significant detail. They had been in the kitchen together after supper, Belle washing the dishes and Raymond drying them and putting them away, a division of labor they had arrived at by simple proximity, and that Eli always took as his opportunity to escape upstairs. The kitchen was warm and smelled of the venison stew she had made, and the lamp on the table cast everything in warm amber. She handed him a plate, and as he took it their fingers overlapped on the rim and he held still, not pulling away, and she looked up at him and he looked down at her, and the distance between them was very small and the moment was very clear, and he said, "Belle," in a way that asked a question without the words for it, and she set down the cloth she was holding and looked at him steadily, and he bent his head and kissed her gently and carefully. And she kissed him back with a steadiness and a certainty that was entirely like her, and when they drew back she looked at him for a long time without saying anything, and her eyes were bright. "All right," she said at last. He laughed. "All right." "All right," she said again, with the ghost of a smile, and picked up her cloth and went back to the dishes, and he stood there for a moment feeling utterly and completely foolish with happiness, and then he picked up the dry cloth and went back to drying. They did not rush. Belle was not a person who rushed toward anything, and Raymond had learned over the long, slow month of knowing her that the pacing she set was exactly right, that what she arrived at through patience was worth the patience. Through December and into the bitter cold of January 1880, they moved through their courtship with the same care they applied to everything on the farm. And what grew between them was solid the way good fence is solid. Not flashy, not fragile, built to hold in hard weather. Eli, who was 8 and perceptive in the quiet way of children who spend a lot of time with adults, had figured out the situation some time before anyone told him anything, and had adjusted to it with the same practical equanimity his mother brought to most things. One morning he looked across the breakfast table at Raymond and said, very directly, "Are you going to stay forever?" Raymond looked at him and then at Belle, who was looking at her coffee cup with an expression that was trying to be neutral. "I'd like to," Raymond said, "if your mother agrees." "Do you agree, Mama?" Eli asked. Belle looked up. Her eyes moved between her son and Raymond. "I think that's a conversation Mr. Garrison and I need to have privately, Eli," she said. "You could have it now," Eli offered helpfully. "I won't say anything." "Eat your eggs," Belle said. Eli ate his eggs with the expression of someone who has made his position clear and is content to let the adults catch up. Raymond and Belle had the conversation that evening after supper, after Eli was in bed, out on the porch despite the cold, which was their place for the serious things. There was a full moon that night, extraordinarily bright, laying silver light over the snow-covered valley in a way that made everything look clean and clear and impossibly beautiful. "Eli asked you directly," Belle said. "He did," Raymond said. "He doesn't ask things he doesn't want an honest answer to," she said. "He's like me that way." "I know," Raymond said. "So I'll give you the honest answer I'd have given him. I want to stay here. I want to stay with you and Eli and this farm for the rest of my life if you'll have me." He paused. "I know I'm asking a great deal. I know this has been fast by some measures." "4 months," Belle said. "4 months since I came down from the road," he agreed. "I know that's not long, but I also know what I know, and I've known it for a while, and I think you know what you know too." She was quiet for a long moment, standing at the porch rail with her coat pulled around her and her breath making small clouds in the cold air. The valley lay bright and still below them, and the stars were fierce above the moon-washed sky. "Chester was a good husband," she said. "I want you to know I'm not replacing him. I'm not looking for a substitute. What I'm considering with you is a different thing, built on different ground." "I know that," Raymond said. "I'm not trying to be Chester. I wouldn't be able to, and I wouldn't want to. I'm trying to be Raymond Garrison, who wants to marry Belle Winslow if she'll have him." A very long silence. "Yes," Belle said. Simple and direct, exactly like her. He looked at her, and she was looking back at him with those clear gray eyes. And her face in the moonlight was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And he reached out and took her hand, and she turned it over and laced her fingers through his and held on. "Yes," she said again, softer, and leaned her head against his shoulder. And they stood in the cold silver night above their valley, holding on. They were married in March of 1880, in the small community church in Cimarron, on a cold, clear day when the snow was still on the mountains but the first tentative green was showing along the creek. The ceremony was simple, because Belle wanted it simple, and it was presided over by the circuit preacher who came through every other month. A thin, earnest man named Brother Caleb who had married a dozen couples in the territory and had never yet gotten it wrong. Dearborn from the general store was there, and a neighboring farm family named the Porters, and a woman named Marguerite who had been a friend to Belle since before Chester's death, and a handful of other Cimarron citizens who came because they were genuinely glad to see Belle Winslow have something good happen. Raymond's aunt had been too far to travel, but he had written her a letter that he knew would make her cry in the good way. Eli stood beside Raymond during the ceremony with great solemnity in his good shirt, and when Brother Caleb pronounced them married and Raymond bent to kiss Belle, Eli exhaled like a man whose long-held plan had finally come together. Belle wore a dress she had made herself from blue wool, the same deep blue as the morning sky over the valley, and she had flowers in her hair, small dried ones, because it was March and the wildflowers wouldn't come for weeks yet, but they were beautiful anyway. the color of old gold. Raymond wore his good coat and his good boots and had his hair cut at the barber shop the morning before, and he stood at the altar and watched her come down the aisle on her own, because she had said she would walk herself. Thank you, and he had said of course, and she had come to him with that steady, purposeful walk, and he had taken her hand, and that was that. They rode home to the farm together as the afternoon light went gold over the valley. Eli wedged between them again on the wagon bench the way he always was, and Belle's hand was in Raymond's while he held the reins with the other. And Eli fell asleep against Raymond's arm before they were halfway home, and Raymond looked at Belle over the sleeping boy's head, and she looked back at him, and they were both smiling. And the roan and the bay mare walked steadily home through the golden afternoon. And the farm came into sight below the ridge with its red barn, and its repaired fence, and its winter-quiet fields, and it was the finest sight Raymond Garrison had ever seen in his life. The spring that followed was a working spring, which was the only kind of farm in the New Mexico territory really permitted. They plowed and planted together, Raymond driving the team while Belle walked the rows behind, and Eli did his school lessons in the mornings and helped in the afternoons, and the days were long and full and good in the way that full days on good land with the right people always are. Raymond rode into Cimarron one morning in April and went to see a land attorney named Haddon, and by the end of that meeting, his name had been added to the deed of the Winslow farm, a matter that Belle had insisted on as formally and matter-of-factly as she insisted on everything. "It's your farm now, too," she had said simply. "It should say so on paper." Stokes came by once more in April, though Raymond suspected it was more curiosity now than genuine interest, and when he found Raymond and Belle working side by side in the yard he looked at the situation, looked at the ring on Belle's hand, recalibrated his entire position in about 3 seconds, tipped his hat with genuine politeness, and rode away without mentioning an offer. Raymond gave him credit for that. Some men would have made it awkward. Stokes was at least a practical man. The east fence held through the spring rains. The barn roof shed water like it was supposed to. The crops came in green and straight, and there was enough rain through May and June to keep them that way. And the red heifer that had gotten through the fence twice before found, to her apparent indignation, that the new posts and wire presented a significantly less negotiable argument. On a morning in early June, Raymond came out to the porch before dawn, as he always did, and found Belle already there with her tools arrayed on the railing in their familiar row. She was working the drawknife with the right angle and the long, smooth strokes, and she looked up at him as he came out and moved over slightly on the step to make room, and he sat beside her and picked up the hatchet, and they worked together in the dark before dawn the way they had from the beginning, side by side in the lamplight with the whetstone between them and the first blue light of morning coming slowly over the mountains to the east. "You don't have to do this before daylight," he said. "I can help with it now." "I know," she said, "but I like it. I've always liked it, the quiet." She drew the blade across the stone, the feeling of the day not yet started. Everything still possible. He understood that completely. He picked up the hatchet and began sharpening it at the angle she had shown him, which was now his angle too, the angle they'd arrived at together, and they worked in companionable silence while the sky lightened and the first birds began somewhere in the cottonwoods along the creek. "Raymond," she said after a while, "I need to tell you something." She set the drawknife down and turned to look at him, and he saw in her face that it was a significant something, and he set the hatchet down too and waited. She held his gaze with her clear gray eyes. "We're going to have a baby," she said. The morning stopped. The light held itself still. The birds paused, or seemed to. Then they were all going again, the birds, the light, the blood in his veins, and Raymond looked at his wife's face, at the careful, searching, hoping look in her eyes, and he put his hand on her face just gently, palm to cheek, and said, "Belle." She leaned into his hand just slightly. "Well," she said. "I'm so glad," he said. "I'm so entirely glad." She breathed out. He could feel it against his hand, that long exhale of relief and pleasure. and she turned her head and pressed her lips briefly to his palm in a gesture so unguarded and warm that he felt it all the way through. "Eli's going to be very self-satisfied about it," she said. "He's been lobbying for a sibling since February." Raymond laughed. "He has a long view, that boy." "He does," she agreed. "He gets it from me." They told Eli at breakfast. He received the information with a silence that lasted exactly 5 seconds, a personal record, and then produced the expression of a man whose every prediction has been vindicated. "I knew it," he said. "I told Tommy Porter that this was probably going to happen, and he said probably not, and now I'm going to be right." "Do try not to gloat, sweetheart," Belle said. Eli tried. It was not his most successful effort. The summer of 1880 moved through the valley in long, golden waves of heat and work and plenty. Belle showed, and then showed more, and continued to work the farm with the same energy she always had, which Raymond watched with a combination of admiration and periodic anxiety. And she dealt with his periodic anxiety by giving him the look that meant she appreciated the concern and was going to disregard it. And he disregarded the disregard and kept being anxious. And she kept working. And they negotiated this the way they negotiated most things. With honesty and a fair amount of affectionate stubbornness on both sides. She did accept his help with the heavier morning tasks, though she continued to do the tool sharpening herself with absolute consistency. He had come to understand that it was not about the tools, not entirely, though the tools did need sharpening and she sharpened them well. It was about the practice of it, the ritual assertion, every morning before the world woke up, that she was capable and present and ready. He would not take that from her for anything. He added his own whetstone to the porch step routine, though. He was developing a feel for it now, the right angle and pressure, the sound that meant the edge was coming right. She watched him work sometimes with that proprietary expression that meant she was grading his technique, and occasionally offered a small correction, and he took the corrections with genuine gratitude, because she was still better at it than he was, and he saw no point in pretending otherwise. The neighbors noticed their happiness and were glad of it, because communities like theirs depended on the mutual goodwill of the people in them. And a farm that was functioning well and a family that was whole was a good thing for everyone in the valley. Marguerite came by in August and spent the afternoon with Belle, and Raymond took Eli fishing in the creek and gave the women their time. And when they came back, the house smelled of fresh coffee and something baked, and Eli ate 3 biscuits before dinner without any real remorse about it. Raymond wrote a long letter to his aunt in Taos, and described his life with what he thought was appropriate modesty, but which probably still conveyed the full degree of his happiness. And his aunt wrote back a letter of 14 pages that covered 2 generations of family news he had missed by drifting, and concluded with a declaration that she intended to visit in the spring, which was enthusiastically seconded by Eli, who had developed a deep philosophical interest in ants. September arrived and the days shortened, and the air took on the sharpness of the coming fall, and Belle was large with the pregnancy, and still managing the kitchen garden and the small livestock with characteristic thoroughness, though Raymond had quietly taken over the more strenuous outdoor work without either of them making a ceremony of it. The baby came on the 22nd of October, 1880, 1 year to the month after Raymond had first seen Belle's lantern from the road above the valley. It came quickly, as their son evidently had a view about efficiency, and Marguerite was there to help, and Raymond paced the yard outside in the dark and listened to the sounds from inside the house with his heart in his throat until there was a different sound, a new sound, a small fierce voice asserting itself into the night air, and then he stopped pacing and stood still and felt the world reorganize itself around that sound. Marguerite came to the door. "It's a boy," she said. "Come in." He was small and red and absolutely furious about everything, and Belle was exhausted and beautiful and holding him with that same focused certainty she brought to every important thing, and she looked up at Raymond when he came to the bedside and said, "Come meet your son." and he sat on the edge of the bed and looked at this small, angry, miraculous person who was his, and could not speak for a moment, which was not a common experience for him. "He looks like you," Belle said. "God help him," Raymond said, and Belle laughed, tired and full of light, and Eli appeared in the doorway where he had been waiting with barely sustainable patience, and Raymond reached out and waved him in, and Eli came and stood at the bedside with enormous eyes and looked at his brother for a long time. "He's very small," Eli said. "You were too," Belle said. "You got bigger." "What are we naming him?" Eli asked. Raymond looked at Belle. They had talked about names the way they talked about everything, honestly and without hurry. They had 2 candidates for a boy. Raymond looked at his wife and let her decide. "John," she said. "John Chester Garrison." She looked at Raymond. "Chester for his grandfather he won't know. John because it's a good plain name that a man can wear well." "John Chester Garrison," Raymond said. He tried the name out loud and found it was exactly right, solid and clear, a name with room in it to grow. Good name. John Chester Garrison expressed no opinion on the matter, being occupied with more pressing concerns, and the lamp burned warm on the bedside table, and the October night pressed cold against the windows. And inside the farmhouse on the Cimarron Road there was warmth and the smell of wood smoke, and the sound of a new voice in the world. Raymond sat with Belle until she fell asleep, which did not take long, and he sat a while longer holding his son and listening to the quiet of the house. Eli had gone back to bed with the solemn, satisfied air of someone who has witnessed a significant historical event. Marguerite had gone home with a lantern and her coat. The fire was low but steady in the kitchen stove. Raymond looked down at John Chester and thought about roads and ridges and lanterns burning in pre-dawn dark, and the sound of a whetstone in October. He thought about all the mornings he had ridden past things without stopping, the long habit of moving on, and how impossible it now seemed that he had ever considered this farm just another thing to pass. He thought about a woman who had sharpened her own tools in the dark, because no one else was going to do it, who had held a farm together by the force of her own capable hands and stubborn heart, who had looked at him with measuring gray eyes and offered him cornbread on a fence post without ceremony. He thought about the life they had built together in the 14 months since he had ridden down from that road, and he thought it was the best thing he had ever put his hand to. In the morning he rose before the sun, as he always did now, and found Belle's side of the bed empty, and felt a small spike of alarm before he heard the familiar sound through the bedroom window, the ring of whetstone on steel in the quiet pre-dawn. He got up and put on his coat and went to the door, and there she was, 3 days after giving birth, sitting on the porch step in the cold morning dark with the lantern burning on the step beside her and the hatchet in one hand and the whetstone in the other, working steadily through her row. "You should be resting," he said from the doorway. She looked up at him with that expression that meant she appreciated the concern and was going to disregard it. "John is sleeping. Eli is sleeping. I have 20 minutes. He went inside and poured 2 cups of coffee and came back and sat down on the step beside her and set her cup next to the lantern. She picked it up, took a sip, and set it back down and went on sharpening. He picked up the drawknife and the whetstone and started on his side of the row. They worked together in the dark before dawn, the 2 of them on the porch steps with their tools and their coffee and the cold October air, and the sound of steel on stone ringing out across the quiet valley below. The sky to the east was beginning its slow shift from black to the deep, rich blue that comes before color returns to the world. Somewhere in the cottonwoods along the creek, the first bird of the morning began. Inside the house, a boy slept in his bed and a baby slept in his cradle, and the lamp in the kitchen window threw its warm light out into the dark yard, and the farm lay around them in the early morning, solid and real and fully theirs. Belle finished the hatchet and moved to the mattock, and the sound of her sharpening changed register slightly, a lower, wider stroke for the broader blade, and Raymond listened to it and matched his rhythm to hers, and the morning came on around them slowly in all its cold and perfect stillness. "Same time tomorrow," he said, which was what he said most mornings now. She passed the mattock from one hand to the other to get the angle right on the back edge. "Same time tomorrow," she said. She leaned her shoulder against his, just lightly, in the way she had started to do in these quiet morning hours, and he leaned back, and they stayed like that as the sky brightened and the valley below emerged from the darkness into the first pale gold of a new day, and all the things that needed to be done were waiting to be done, and they were ready. He had watched from the road for a week before he'd come down and asked to help. He understood now that the asking had been the best thing he had ever done, and that she, in her clear-eyed, practical, undeceived way, had known it would be the moment she decided to say yes. The lantern burned between them on the step, the whetstone sang its morning song, and Raymond Garrison and Belle Winslow sat in the blue dark before dawn and sharpened their tools together. And the world beyond the valley was whatever it was, but inside the circle of that lamplight, on that repaired and solid porch, with the smoke rising from the chimney and the horses moving quietly in the good warm barn, everything was exactly what it should be, whole and solid and built to last.